These are some of the worst school shootings that you probably have never heard of. Starting with the Pearl High School shooting in 1997, where a troubled teen decided to tragically take the innocent lives of 2 of his classmates, all because his girlfriend broke up with him. This messed up kid even murdered his own mother before carrying out this disgusting school shooting. Let me tell you who I'm talking about. 16-year-old Luke Woodham, a junior at Pearl High School located in Pearl, Mississippi, United States. He was severely bullied in school because of his weight, considering he was on the heavier side, and people typically described him as a weirdo. But hold on, listen to this. When he had an assignment in school to write about how he would spend the day as his teacher, he said these horrible things. "I would go crazy and kill all the other teachers. Then I would slowly and very painfully torture all the principals to death. I would get a gun and blow my brains out all over the doggone room and leave my house to Luke Woodham." And what's even crazier is that no one thought that Luke was dangerous or needed any type of help. This kid clearly had something wrong with him, yet he was still allowed to attend Pearl High School like absolutely nothing happened. In school is where he met a girl named Christina Menifee, a fellow student who was actually new to the school, having only recently moved to Pearl, Mississippi. Christina thought Luke seemed like a nice guy having no knowledge of his questionable past, so the two of them grew close, becoming good friends and eventually developing a romantic relationship. Luke adored Christina a lot, and as you could probably guess, he had never been in a relationship before. But of course, something goes wrong. Luke became incredibly attached to Christina, like very, very obsessed. So much so to the point that Christina would complain to her friends about how overly attached he was. What didn't help her situation was the fact that Luke's mother would always join them on dates, and anytime they went out in public. Because of this, Christina just couldn't handle it anymore. Between the heavy obsession and Luke's mom following them around, she had to break up with him. She ended the relationship in October of 1996. Luke was sent into a downward spiral. He became incredibly depressed and was completely devastated.
She just, all of a sudden one day, just broke up with me. And I was devastated. I was gonna kill myself.
He even threatened to take his own life. Luke's depression and devastation would continue for an entire year after the breakup. He began to hate the world and everything in it, falling deeper and deeper into a terrible state of mind. This is right around the time when he meets a guy named Grant Boyett, who would eventually become the mastermind behind the Pearl High School shooting. Grant was a few years older than Luke. He seemed like a good person, having a nice family, and was generally viewed as a good kid. However, he had a much darker side to him. Grant was a Satanist, was fascinated by Hitler, and was violent at times. A manipulative, straight-up evil kid. He ran a group full of misfit teenagers, which Grant called the Croft. So Luke and Grant became great friends. They started hanging out, and at first it was just playing video games together. But once Luke became more comfortable around Grant, this is where things really started to get sinister. Grant convinces Luke to become a Satanist too. With his messed up Satanist propaganda, he tells Luke that they need to eliminate all of their enemies if they want to move forward in life. And who would Luke's enemy be, you might ask? Well, none other than the girl who Luke thinks ruined his whole life and broke his heart, Christina Menifee. This poor girl did nothing wrong. She just happened to get involved with the wrong person, a complete psychopath. Luke was ready to carry out whatever Grant wanted him to do, including murdering innocent people in cold blood. Grant's group, the Croft, with their sick and twisted minds, came up with a dark plan to kill students at Pearl High School. But that's not even it. They decided that they would do the same thing to more young students at the junior high school afterwards. And to no surprise, they would send their group member Luke Woodham into the school to cause the tragic massacre. And this is where he got his nickname, the Assassin. The rest of the Croft would wait for Luke to finish the shooting. Then they would all meet up and flee to Mexico to escape any potential cops or punishment. If that plan worked, they would be free after committing this massacre. Basically, all they were doing was forcing Luke to do all the dirty work and carry out their dark, murdering fantasies. So when October 1st, 1997 came around, Luke Woodham was ready. He was completely prepared to carry out a brutal attack on his classmates. But what he wanted to do the most was take revenge on his ex-girlfriend, Christina. That morning, Luke woke up early at around 5 a.m. because before he goes to carry out his awful attack on Pearl High School, there is something else he must do first. Something that's just disgusting. Luke comes to the conclusion that he has to murder his own mother, Mary Ann Woodham. And let me tell you why he thinks that. The previous night, Luke had asked his mother for the keys to her car, and not only that, her gun too. Knowing that Luke didn't even have his driver's license, she of course says no and refuses Luke's suspicious requests. However, he didn't like that response. He needed the gun and the car in order to carry out his attack. Without the car and gun, that couldn't happen. So somewhere in his twisted brain, he decided that the only plausible solution to this would be to kill his own mother.
I didn't want to kill my mother. I didn't want to. I do love my mother. It's just I wanted revenge on Christina, and my mom wouldn't just. No, sure, Luke, take the gun, take the car. You gotta understand, I did not want to. It's just the only way. That's the only.
Ladies in box heads, this guy makes me sick. I would never do this to my mother. So he walks over to the kitchen and grabs a knife. Then he returns to his bedroom and grabs an aluminum baseball bat. When he leaves his bedroom, he spots his off-guard mother standing in the hall. Immediately, Luke begins to scream. He yells at her, threatening his mother in the hallway. She's confused but scared and unsure what to do. Just take a second to imagine that your own son is threatening to murder you. In a panic, his mother sprints to her bedroom trying to escape her own son. Luke chases after her, trying to swing his aluminum bat right at her head. He knocks over furniture while aiming for his screaming mother. She falls backwards onto the bed, terrified for her life. Then Luke starts to violently beat his own mother with the baseball bat. He hits Mary Ann twice, in the head and in the face. He reaches over and grabs a pillow off his mother's bed. He shoves it over her face, preventing his already weak and injured mother from breathing, or even screaming. Luke then grabs a knife he took from the kitchen and, well, he begins to stab her to death. Mary Ann Woodham was stabbed 7 times and slashed 11 times by her own son, in her own bed, in her own house. He hated his mother, and he claims that his mother hated him too, saying that she mistreated him his whole life, showing favoritism to his brother, and blaming Luke for all of her problems. And guys, whether this is true or not, this is not a valid reason to murder someone. After killing his mother, Luke would sit down and write his manifesto and, well, his will. He then grabbed his mother's rifle and her keys and started driving towards Pearl High School. He pulls up to the school and parks his mother's car. He grabs the manifesto he wrote that morning and shoves it in his pocket. Then Luke walks away from the car and starts to head towards the doors of the school. But first, without his gun. His goal was to track down one of the members of the weirdo Satanist group, the Croft, and to give them his manifesto. After that, he would start to execute the horrible plan that they came up with. He hands the paper to Justin Sledge, a student at the school and a member of the Croft. He tells Justin to hand it to their leader, Grant. And guys, Luke fully expected to die that day once his shooting was complete. The manifesto had his will detailing who gets possession of Luke's stuff after he dies. It even had his funeral details. Justin notifies his friends, completely aware of the horrors that were about to happen in the school. So they go and hide in the library, and they purposely didn't warn anyone else. As a member of the Croft, Justin wanted Luke to kill his classmates. These guys are just sick. Meanwhile, Luke is exiting the school, but unfortunately not for good. He was headed towards his car to grab his rifle from the back seat. He was ready to take revenge on his bullies and on his ex-girlfriend for breaking his heart. Luke makes his way into the school, armed with a rifle, screaming things like, "This ends now." He desperately searches the rooms for one particular person, Christina Menifee. At 8:06 a.m., he finally finds her. The poor girl is minding her own business, casually walking with her friend Lydia Dew. Just seconds after spotting her, without any hesitation, Luke raises his rifle and aims it right at Christina. She was absolutely terrified, as she never would have expected to be in this situation. Luke fires the gun aimed at his ex-girlfriend. Unfortunately, the bullet is sent directly into Christina's neck, killing her immediately. Her body drops to the ground as blood spills from her wound and onto the floor. Yet again, he lifts the rifle and this time aiming at Christina's friend, Lydia, who happened to be standing right next to her. In a state of shock, Lydia is just horrified and she freezes up. She just watched her friend get brutally murdered right next to her. Unsure what else to do, Lydia attempts to make a run for it, to get the hell away from this psychopath. She turns around and begins to run, but then Luke fires the rifle at Lydia's back, killing her as well. Her body drops as two of Luke's victims now lay in pools of blood on the school floor. At this point, Luke claims that he snapped. He begins firing at random, shooting anyone that he sees. He turns around and shoots into the crowd of people. His bullet would hit Stephanie Wiggins, a sophomore. She was shot in the hip, completely shattering it. On a more positive note, she would thankfully survive this attack. But afterwards, she required extensive surgeries and physical therapy to even recover. Anyways, another one of his bullets would hit a kid named Jerry safely, right in the leg. Jerry was attempting to shield his girlfriend from Luke's heinous attack. Jerry falls to the ground, bleeding and screaming in pain. Oddly enough, Luke walks over to Jerry and apologizes to him, saying, "Oh Jerry, I'm sorry, I didn't recognize you." Luke actually had no problems with Jerry and mistook him for another student, shooting him on accident. Thankfully, Jerry would also survive. Then Luke notices a person in the crowd that he genuinely wanted to kill, Alan Westbrook, a kid that Luke claimed had always picked on him and bullied him. Alan had tripped and fallen onto the ground when he was trying to run. As he was laying on the floor, Luke aimed his rifle right at him, showing no mercy. Luke fires the rifle multiple times, trying to end this kid's life. Blood splatters everywhere as Alan is left severely injured. Another student at the scene describes Alan's injury as looking like someone tried to debone the meat off of a deer. Oh, God. He would be paralyzed for months after this incident, but he also thankfully survived. The scene at the school was absolutely horrifying. It was a goddamn massacre. The bodies of students, both dead or alive, lay on the ground of Pearl High School covered in blood. Thankfully, Luke's rifle jams as he goes to shoot more of his classmates. He takes this as a sign to end his reign of terror and decides to exit the school. He rushes into the parking lot of the school, trying to reach his car so he can drive off and flee to Mexico, or whatever the hell the Crofts' plan was. But as he's running, he hears someone screaming behind him. The assistant principal, Joel Myrick. He's yelling at Luke, demanding him to stop and not enter his car. But Luke doesn't listen. He gets in his vehicle and drives off. And guys, Joel Myrick, an absolute hero by the way, gets in his own car and chases after Luke. Like I mentioned earlier, Luke is an unlicensed driver and an unskilled one too. He swerves the car off the road, driving recklessly. He drives in the wrong lane and passes right through other cars and traffic. Soon enough, his terrible driving would catch up to him because he loses control of his vehicle and ends up crashing into a tree on the side of the road. Joel Myrick catches up and gets out of his car. He then grabs his own weapon, a Colt .45 handgun, with his gun raised in the air ready to shoot as he aims it at Luke. Myrick approaches Luke, slowly walking towards the kid who just shot up his school. "Don't move or I'll blow your head off," he yells at Luke, who sits disheveled in the driver's seat of his mother's car. Myrick demands Luke to get the hell on the ground. Luke decides that he actually doesn't want to die, so he complies with Myrick's orders and slowly lays on the ground. I don't really know what caused this switch up. The assistant principal holds the handgun, aiming it right at Luke's head as he waits for the police officers to arrive at the scene. When the cops do arrive, Luke is arrested and taken into custody. Luke's terrifying shooting lasted a total of 10 minutes. In that 10 minutes, he killed 2 students and wounding 7 others. And of course, he brutally murdered his own mother just hours before the school shooting. Luke was sentenced to life in prison for the murder of his mother. He was later convicted again, sentenced to 2 more life sentences for the murders of the 2 girls. Then another 7 20-year sentences as a result of his 7 attempted murder charges. Now, here's where I want your opinion. He was not sentenced to death. Look, I don't really know what you guys think about the death penalty, but do you think he deserved the death penalty? Anyways, despite whatever you think, this guy will be eligible for parole in 2046, at the age of 65. And what happened to the Croft? Well, the members of the group were mostly minors, whose conspiracy charges were dropped. However, the leader of the Croft, Grant Boyette, wasn't a minor. At 18 years old during the shooting, he was eligible to be charged for conspiracy. He was then sentenced to 6 months of boot camp and 5 years of probation. Next up, we have the University of Texas Tower shooting. Let's take it back to August 1st, 1966, a day that was marked as the first mass shooting in the United States. The University of Texas Tower shooting was something that no one expected. And who was the perpetrator of this attack? The killer was a man named Charles Whitman. This guy wasn't just your average angry dude. He was a former Marine, had been an Eagle Scout, and by all accounts seemed like the kind of guy who had it all together. Whitman had a history of anger issues and violent thoughts that he kept hidden from everyone. He got himself professional help for his mental health struggles, but it didn't go far. In fact, he wrote in his journal about his disturbing thoughts of wanting to go up on the tower and start shooting people. And here's where it gets weird. He actually knew something was wrong with him. Whitman wrote a note the night before the shooting, stating that he didn't know why he had these violent thoughts but felt like he was losing control. He even asked for his brain to be examined after his death, thinking that a brain tumor might be the cause. Spoiler alert, they actually found one during his autopsy, but whether it influenced his actions is still being debated. In the early hours of August 1st, Whitman put his plan into motion. He started by stabbing his mother at her house, and then, his wife Kathy while she slept in their bed. Why? Well, in his note, he claimed that he loved them both so deeply that he couldn't take the thought of them living with the knowledge of what he was about to do. Now let's talk about the tower. The University of Austin at Texas has this iconic 307-foot tall clock tower that can be seen from miles away. Whitman had been preparing for this day for a while. He stashed a whole bunch of weapons, including rifles, shotguns, pistols, and over 700 rounds of ammunition. At about 11:30 a.m., Whitman packed up his supplies: guns, ammo, food, water, and even a machete, then headed to the university. He entered the main building and took the elevator to the 27th floor, just below the observation deck. From there, he lugged his gear up a short flight of stairs and began setting up his sniper's nest. At around 11:48 a.m., Whitman aims his weapon down at the students walking beneath him. When a person appeared in his sights, he opened fire, not caring who it was. His first victims? Claire Wilson, an 18-year-old student who was 8 months pregnant, and her boyfriend Thomas Ekman. They were walking across the South Mall when Whitman shot Claire in the abdomen. And guys, this killed her unborn kid instantly. Then, Thomas, trying to help her, was shot and killed moments later. Now, Claire actually survived but was left lying on the hot concrete, unable to move for over an hour. This was just the beginning. Whitman's vantage point from the tower gave him a clear view of the entire campus. For the next 96 minutes, he shot at anyone who entered his line of sight. His victims were students, faculty, anyone. No one was safe. A peaceful campus turned into a war zone in seconds. People had no idea what was happening at first. Students and faculty thought that the gunfire was construction noise. But as the bodies started to fall, people panicked. People were running for cover, ducking behind buildings, trees, and cars. Some even tried to play dead, hoping Whitman wouldn't notice them. The police were notified almost instantly, but there was a problem. No one could figure out where the shots were coming from. Remember, this is 1966. Mass shootings were not a thing that people had experienced before. By the time the police had realized that Whitman was up in the tower, 10 minutes had already passed, and several people were dead. Here's the thing that's a little bit frustrating to me. It took time for the police to organize a proper response. The first officers on the scene were Officer Billy Speed and Officer Houston McCoy. I mean, they did what they could, but they were essentially pinned down by Whitman's sniper fire. Officer Speed was even shot and killed while taking cover behind a column on campus. Local civilians also joined the effort. Several bystanders pulled out their own rifles and started firing back at Whitman from the ground. This helped suppress the gunfire, giving police a chance to move in. But for over an hour, Whitman had almost total control of the campus from his tower. At around 1:24 p.m., two police officers, Ramiro Martinez and Houston McCoy, made their way up the tower, along with a civilian named Alan Crum. Let's focus on the cops who took Whitman down, because these guys, straight up legends. Officer Ramiro Ray Martinez and Houston McCoy, along with the civilian I just mentioned. So Martinez, who's off duty at the time, hears the reports of the shooting and rushes to the campus. I mean, he's not even on the clock, but he still decides to help. That's a hero. Meanwhile, Crum, a university employee with freaking zero police training, sees the shooting from a nearby building and volunteers to help out of the kindness of his heart. This guy didn't even have a gun at first, just the audacity to run towards the sounds of a shooting. They know the only way to stop Whitman is to go up the tower and confront him. No snipers, no SWAT. Just a handful of men with shotguns and handguns versus a Marine-trained sharpshooter with a high-powered rifle. Martinez and McCoy eventually reach the 27th floor. They head up to the observation deck and slowly start creeping along the walkway. Very, very carefully and quietly. The tension is insane at the moment. One step at a time, the smallest noise could give them all away and cost their lives. At 1:24 p.m., they finally spot Whitman. Martinez unloads his revolver, but it's actually McCoy's shotgun blast that brings Whitman down. One shot and it's over. Whitman's reign of terror, which lasted a horrifying 96 minutes, is finally done. In total, 14 people were killed on August 1st, and 31 others were wounded. Guys, I just want to say, don't forget about Claire Wilson, who lost her unborn baby during the shooting. One of the youngest victims, aside from the baby, was Karen Griffith, who was just 17 years old. She was hit in the lung by one of Whitman's bullets and died a week later from her injuries. Just disgusting. Next up, we have the Bath school disaster in 1927. Not exactly a school shooting, but a school massacre. And the reason I wanted to include it in this video is because it's one of the deadliest in the United States history, where over 40 people, including children, were killed by a mass murdering psychopath. May 18th, 1927. In Bath Township, Michigan, a small, rural farming community with a population of only a few hundred. Home to the Bath School, a small 3-story building with 314 total students. May 18th was actually the last day of the school year. Students were excited to end the school year and start their summer vacation. But unfortunately, some of these students wouldn't even make it to the end of the day. At 8:45 a.m., the lives of these students would be changed forever. Just a few moments after the start of the morning classes at school, a sudden explosion is heard. A sound so loud that it was reportedly heard miles away. A massive blast ripped through the north wing of the school. Debris flew everywhere, the walls and roofs of the school caved in. Students and teachers were buried under the rubble as the ones who survived screamed for help. It looked like a war zone, just absolutely horrifying. A witness of the aftermath even said this. Let me get the exact quote. "There was a pile of children of about 5 or 6 under the roof, and some of them had arms sticking out. Some had legs, some just had their heads sticking out. They were unrecognizable because they were covered in dust, plaster, and blood. Nearby adults rushed to the scene. They did everything they could to try and free the trapped victims from under the rubble. They grabbed ropes and tried pulling out large pieces of debris. Parents of the children at the school were freaking out. Understandably, their kids could be trapped or even worse, dead. The authorities eventually arrived at the scene. They began an investigation, desperately trying to find out who the hell caused this insane accident. After investigating the school, the police actually discovered something horrifying. This wasn't an accident. This was a planned attack. They found hundreds of pounds of explosives in the basement of the school. They had been detonated by someone, they just had no idea who. Ladies and boxheads, not to mention there was another 500 pounds of undetonated dynamite that was also found in the basement of the south wing, on the opposite side of the detonated explosives. A big canister of gasoline was found with the explosives, meaning whoever did this even had a backup plan in case the dynamite explosives weren't ignited. Whoever did this was pure evil. But hold on just a second, this attack wasn't even over yet. While the school was being investigated, a second terrifying attack would take place at the school. A man in a truck shows up to the aftermath of the explosion, parking the truck near the school and near a crowd of bystanders, as people were busy with the rescue efforts. Not long after this man arrives, another explosion takes place. this time outside of the school. The truck had exploded, sending pieces of the truck and debris firing off in all directions. People were either impaled by the flying pieces or blown up by the initial explosion. This would kill another 4 people and injure plenty more. This second explosion increased the total death toll to 45. That's right, 45 people died in this small town all in just one day. 38 of these were children aged 8 to 14 years old. So who the hell was the perpetrator? What insane psychopath wanted to kill all of these innocent children? Meet Andrew Kehoe, a 55-year-old local farmer in Bath Township. A man so desperate for revenge that he was willing to murder innocent children and even himself. And guys, Kehoe was so upset that his property taxes were increasing each year, and he knew that his tax money was being used to fund the Bath school. So he planned to take revenge on the school and community for taking his money by mass murdering the children and teachers inside. This man was a complete, disgusting monster. Over the span of multiple days and in different locations, he purchased the dynamite that would be used to carry out this heinous plan. He didn't want to raise any suspicion from buying it all at once, which is why he spread it out. After all, he was a farmer. It's not uncommon for farmers to use dynamite on their properties, but never the insane amount that he was trying to acquire. So once he gathered all of his explosives, he went and planted it in the school basement. He typically visited the school at night, carrying large boxes full of dynamite to plant them unnoticed. And I almost forgot to mention the fact that Kehoe literally worked for the school. He was a very skilled electrician and was offered various jobs to conduct repairs for the school's lighting. That's pretty much how he gained entry to the school's basement in the first place. He had complete access to the school, and yes, this was planned too. He accepted the job offer knowing he wanted to destroy the whole goddamn place and kill their students. Again, psychopath. But Kehoe wasn't done after filling the basement with explosives. He then loaded up his own truck with dynamite and shrapnel and drove it right onto the school grounds. He prepared for it to explode after the first explosion, knowing that there would be a crowd of people gathered outside after the first explosion. He genuinely wanted to kill as many people as possible, including himself, because he also died immediately as a result of the truck explosion. Another crazy fact about this monster was that he murdered his ill wife just before committing his attack on the school. His wife, Neil Price Kehoe, was a sick woman. She had been in the hospital for what doctors assumed was tuberculosis. She was released just 2 days before the school attack, only to be murdered by her own husband as she arrived home on their farm. Investigators found her rotting corpse at the Kehoe farm during their investigation, which, by the way, had been destroyed by Andrew Kehoe himself. He took it upon himself to blow up his own damn farm. And guys, like I say in every single one of these type of videos, these topics are very, very sensitive. But I believe it's super important to share these type of stories because often they're forgotten. So boxheads, I love you guys, stay safe, and I hope you learned a thing or two today. Thank you.